Calendar, item 11, presentation and discussion regarding the SFMTA's COVID-19 recovery and restart planning process.
Great. David, could you bring up the slide presentation, please? So before I begin this, I want to just pause for a moment to recognize that the last 2 months have been really hard. Not just for us as an agency and all the technical work that we've needed to do in order to protect the health of our workforce and deal with the leave and financial calamity that has followed. It's also been emotionally exhausting. Almost every member of our workforce has been affected in a deep way by this situation, whether having to deal with kids unexpectedly at home, having members of their family be members of vulnerable populations or testing positive. We did have 12 COVID positive test cases within our family here at the SFMTA. People have been affected in many ways, many of them invisible. It's been really hard. And one of the concerns that I have as a director is just ensuring the emotional health of our workforce in addition to their physical health. That said, for all of the hard work that we've done getting to this part of the COVID curve, we're really just at the beginning. We're at the beginning of a long tragedy, but we're also the beginning of a series of unique opportunities that may rise out of this tragedy. So I want to take a moment to give you a preview of our draft work on an SFMTA transportation recovery plan. Next slide, please. This plan starts with the basic facts that our entire transportation system is in disarray. As all of you know, we had to eliminate 3/4 of muni lines in order to deal with the unprecedented level of COVID-related leave. We're also experiencing, and will continue to experience, likely for years, a deep financial crisis. And so this means that we not only still have problems we need to struggle with, but also some opportunities. We also need to somewhat shift our mission. At the SFMTA, we are committed to supporting the whole city's economic recovery. We know that really the fundamental function of mobility is supporting the economy. We're fundamentally in the land value and economic opportunity business. That's what we do in transportation. And so we knew that we needed to get ahead of the larger citywide economic recovery task force to make sure that we understood what role transportation needs to serve. There cannot be a regional or citywide economic recovery without transportation. And so our recovery plan is rooted in a couple of key factors. Foremost among them is the ever-evolving public health orders and the science-based recommendations of the San Francisco Department of Public Health, as well as the emerging guidance that we're getting from the various city organizations that are oriented around economic recovery, whether that be for small businesses or for social equity. And so our plan needs to meet all the transportation needs driven by the health crisis, but also to address some long-standing problems. It's difficult to create change in San Francisco, despite the fact the world is changing around the city. So we want to set things in place in order to allow the transportation system to be able to return better than it was before, and to allow the agency to be better positioned to serve our customers and to support long-term economic recovery and social equity. Next slide, please. We also see some really difficult problems on the horizon. As we look at what is happening in the East Asian capitals that are further along in their recovery, they are experiencing levels of traffic congestion that greatly exceed the congestion in the pre-COVID economy. It only takes a relatively small shift of travel demand from public transit to driving alone to completely gridlock the entire transportation system. A relatively small shift here in the San Francisco Bay Area would gum up all movement, cutting the ability of the transportation system as a whole to move people. A modest increase in congestion would cut person throughput in half, putting a halt to all of our efforts to support a strong economic recovery. In order for the economic recovery to actually occur, we need to continue to focus on all of the most space-efficient modes of transportation. And that means walking and biking and scootering and wheelchairing and public transit. And as we look at the data here in the San Francisco Bay Area, as you can see on the screen, the rates of driving are ticking up steadily. Our own data here in San Francisco is already seeing a return of congestion in some key corridors. We believe we have a very narrow window of time in order to set the transportation system up so that the city's economy is not strangled in traffic congestion. And we believe that length of time is about 2 months. Sometime between now and August, we've got to make a lot of tough choices. Next slide, please. And so we want to, actually previous slide, goals, thank you. So as always, our highest priority is protecting the health and safety of our workforce and the health and safety of the public. We also know that we need to make sure that the transportation network evolves to meet the ever-changing mobility needs as the Bay Area progresses out of shelter in place. Travel patterns have changed dramatically, and we expect some of those changes will be long-lasting. The last jobs to come back are the ones that support telecommuting, and that's largely office jobs, largely in the financial district. The places where we're seeing the strongest travel demand is in neighborhood commercial districts and in the key institutions that are not downtown. We need to make sure that the mobility system we bring back supports these changed travel behavior. And so as a result, we need to use our actual data in order to bring the transportation system back purposefully, particularly the transit system, and allow the transit system to reflect current travel behavior. Next slide, please. And as always, everything comes back to our values. We have very limited resources as an agency, and so we need to allocate those limited resources in order to best achieve the public good. And that requires deep clarity about our values. So we know that we're going to have some difficult trade-offs to address, and that we need to not only maintain a laser focus on social equity, but also on our role in supporting the economy. We also cannot forget our environmental sustainability values, our customer service values, and the other values that are embodied in our strategic plan. Our infrastructure and services must be a reflection of the adopted values here in San Francisco. Next slide, please. And so we're developing a clear plan that is looking at all of our lines of work and how each needs to be adjusted in order to support the economy. We are, again, continuing to rely on the advice of public health experts at the Department of Public Health. We need to make sure that everything that we're doing is a living document that continues to be adjusted based upon evolving health conditions and what we learn as we go along. This agency is operating and implementing perhaps faster than it ever has. And so all of our documents have a useful life of about 2 weeks before they need to be adjusted. We need to continue working to bring our workforce back to work while understanding the health science and minimizing the health risk to our people. We need to make sure that we are sequencing things in a logical way to bring back transit service in coordination with changes to street operations. We need to focus on all of the most efficient modes of transportation, and that means not just transit, but also investing in better protected bikeways and slow streets and transit-only lanes, and improvements to paratransit and to regulated taxis. We need to support small businesses, our neighborhood commercial districts that are essential to quality of life in our neighborhoods. And as always, we need to be doing this quickly and on an experimental and trial basis, learning from our mistakes and successes while making sure to respond to customer feedback. So with that, what I really want to do is to introduce you to Dan Howard. He is the Technology Systems Manager for the SFMTA's Transit Division, and he is spearheading our recovery efforts as part of our agency's Department Operations Center, and he will tell you about his great work. Next slide, please, and on to Dan.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, directors. The Transportation Recovery Plan consists of the 6 levels that you can see on the screen there, which lay out the sequencing of how the SFMTA will bring back transit service as well as street operations. The 6 levels are designed to be consistent with our state and our city public health orders so that we can expand and potentially contract service to support the economic recovery as our public health allows. We're working closely with our sister agencies as well as the Economic Recovery Task Force to make sure that our efforts are coordinated. Our plans will, of course, be informed by the city's overall effort to recover. So we're currently in level 2 right now. As of May 4th, we still have the shelter in place, which continues to limit the travel for essential trips as some outdoor businesses reopen and recreation restrictions ease. And we still allow retail with curbside service as well as restaurant pickup and delivery. As we're able, Muni and street operations will increase the levels of service to coincide with the increases in permitted activities that we foresee as the city's economic recovery completes. Our ability to increase Muni service and street operations as public health restrictions ease is dependent on our ability to minimize the health risk and increase our availability of our staff, as well as perform those tasks within our budget, which is experiencing trouble, as Jeff alluded to. Through the first few levels of our recovery plan, we're basically keeping a policy of maintaining the core service routes that we established at the beginning of the crisis, and then increasing the capacity and the frequency of service along those routes, rather than looking to expand them right away. The recovery plan will function as a living document, which will adjust continually based on the evolving health conditions, new transportation data as we see it, as well as input that we receive from stakeholders, elected officials, members of the public. The implementation of these measures, all of them will be on a trial basis that will essentially expire at the end of the emergency, at which point we'll either pursue a legislative process to keep improvements in place, or we'll remove the restrictions that were put in place. The recovery team will be continuing to monitor and make adjustments to the plan as the conditions warrant. Next slide, please. In the process of the recovery, our plan addresses the following challenges while meeting our core objectives. The first is a quick return of traffic congestion. As Jeff alluded to in his previous slide, traffic congestion could return above pre-COVID levels and more quickly than we anticipate. We already are receiving data points that are indicating that traffic congestion is starting to come back to the city just with the latest relaxation of health order restrictions. The resource and budget issues that we also have are an issue as we call them upon to move an increasingly large number of people despite the health precautions, requiring several times more space per person, as well as contending with the reduced revenues that are caused by a depressed economy. And then lastly, staff shortages, which could make it difficult to keep pace with both COVID-related absenteeism, which is related to people falling sick or requiring to be quarantined, as well as some of the structural mismatches between how our staff has been assigned and the new operational realities. And that manifests itself as all of a sudden we need a lot more car cleaners in order to maintain our level of service much more than we previously did pre-COVID. Additionally, concerns about personal health and safety are an existential threat to this plan. If we find that our employees are afraid to come to work and they stay home using their sick time or vacation leave. In addition to those challenges, the plan will require some careful consideration of many trade-offs and adjustments. Next slide. So to meet these challenges, we're proposing a series of new and existing strategies. Implementation of the measures will be on a trial basis during the emergency, and as we roll them out, we look forward to learning from our constituents what works and what doesn't work, and then continue to adjust the plan as we need to. Transit lanes, for example, allow Muni riders to avoid traffic congestion, and they've been a part of the city's transit system for over 40 years. The transit lanes, as many of you well know, improve Muni's travel times and reliability, but they also allow our buses to complete their routes faster, which means that they can turn around more quickly at the terminals, which means for Muni service that the same number of buses can actually help us provide more service or higher frequency if we are able to protect the service from congestion with these lanes. Deploying transit lanes on more routes will save our customers time and the agency money, which is something that we've always known. But when we approach it with this crisis, we found that they also will allow us to provide the similar service with the vehicles the staff that we have. With fewer cars on the road, the shelter in place actually simulates the street conditions across the city that we would see as if every Muni route had its own transit lane. And so on average, what we're seeing with the data is that peak Muni travel times were reduced by about 15% on average, except in corridors which already had transit lanes where we observed no change between pre-COVID travel times and now. So we can attribute that 15% change to the effects of traffic congestion. And this is by far the most conclusive evidence or the most effective study that we could ever devise on how effective the Muni Forward program has been in protecting our transit system from congestion in the places that it's been deployed. Simply put, we're finding strong evidence in this crisis that the investments that we've made prior to it are working. These unusual circumstances have also allowed us to use the new data to pinpoint specific locations where we can add new transit lanes and achieve even larger time savings. As we adjust to the effects of COVID-19 on our operating budget, we do anticipate that service cuts will be necessary further down the road. The distancing requirements also that are unique to this pandemic means that even if we were running all of our pre-COVID service today, we would still only be able to serve about half of our ridership. These two realities basically mean that demand for buses and operators have never been higher. And adding these new transit lanes is a cost-effective way to let us use our existing resources more effectively, allowing us to turn out more service, as much service as possible under the present conditions. Next slide, please. Another strategy that we have in the recovery plan is the slow streets that Jeff's already referenced. So the slow streets program meets our distancing requirements for recreation, as well as promotes walking and biking by meeting the travel needs by limiting the through traffic on certain residential streets. More space and slower speeds promotes bicycling and walking while encouraging physical distancing, and it also allows bicycling in particular to be accessible to a wider segment of the population, thereby reducing demand for Muni or driving trips. Simply put, slow streets encourages people to use these forms in a way that we've never seen before. The Slow Streets program is also responsive to many of the neighborhoods which have requested that the SFMTA has provided residential traffic calming. So as Jeff mentioned, we'll continue to implement more slow streets in the recovery plan. We're going to work with the Board of Supervisors to move them forward in their districts in response to requests, as well as suggestions from stakeholders and over 1,300 community responses that we've received from our multilingual survey. While this Slow Streets was established as an emergency measure, we will continue to monitor its performance in responding to the city's needs and evaluate it as a future tool. Next slide, please. The recovery plan also includes strategies to support economic recovery. SFMTA stands ready to support neighborhood business corridors by adapting streets to meet their emerging needs. Curb and street treatments will be vetted in advance so that they don't conflict with Muni routes, Vision Zero goals, or other access needs. And we'll also be providing more dedicated space for bicycling, as well as a complete bicycle network, which will help San Franciscans be more comfortable using a bicycle as a mode of transportation, as well as help reduce crowding on Muni and traffic congestion in the streets. In addition to physical infrastructure like transit-only lanes, curb management, and bike lanes, we are also focused on a number of efforts and programs. In particular, we want to engage with city staff as well as private businesses on various transportation demand strategies, and we want to promote alternative modes of transportation during this crisis. Micromobility in particular has an important role to play, and we will partner with Bay Wheels to provide bike share services. In the future, we are expecting to see up to 4,000 new e-bikes through that partnership. And we will also focus on completing our bike share station network so that we can support a complete rollout of the classic and the e-bike share parking. Additionally, as Jeff mentioned, our work with scooter permittees like SPIN have also ensured that they continue their operations, particularly in support of essential workers and community of concern by expanding their coverage area to include the whole city. And of course, we have additional bike infrastructure, which will be important to support not only bike, but also these forms of micromobility. We're looking into using our existing legislative authority to implement quick build projects, add bike lanes and other similar treatments to some streets as part of this recovery plan. And we're looking forward to engaging with our elected officials and key stakeholders and neighborhood groups to determine the best locations for additional bicycle facilities that go beyond the ones that have already been identified in the quick build program. Next slide, please. Our transportation recovery plan also includes taxis and accessible transportation service, which fill key gaps in our transportation system, particularly now as we scale it back to the core service plan. They help seniors and people with disabilities take essential trips, and they minimize crowding on Muni when they're used. The essential trip card, called the ETC for short, supports our core service plan by helping to pay for door-to-door service for seniors and people with disabilities who may not be able to walk to Muni's core network, but still require transit service. This program will be continued throughout the transportation recovery plan, and we will also continue to evaluate it for long-term continuation. The SFMTA will continue to promote taxi trips as an alternative to Muni to minimize the crowding levels on Muni and to address gaps in coverage that have been caused temporarily as we scale back our service. Lastly, we've implemented strict cleaning procedures for taxis and for paratransit, and we're working to introduce physical barriers in taxis that reduce the risk for both drivers and passengers. Next slide, please. The framework that we have for transportation services and operations and scaling them up as restrictions on activities ease with the successive public health orders and as economic activity resumes and travel for demand increases is called the Transportation Recovery Plan. As we implement measures to support the economic recovery on a trial basis, we look forward to learning from our customers what works and what doesn't work and adjust our plan in real time accordingly to what we're hearing. In terms of next steps for the recovery plan, what I've introduced today is just our introductory framework for the board. We plan on having a continued dialogue with you on various elements of what you've heard. In particular, though, we would like guidance from the SFMTA board on how bold we should be in advancing the various elements like the bike lanes and the transit lanes that you've just heard about. Additionally, within our delivery and our budget constraints, how quickly we should advance the sequence of implementation. And then given what we've proposed given that much of what we propose will be on a trial basis, how do we approach the public engagement in this time of COVID-19, given our needs to implement these changes quickly, but also understanding the limitations of not being able to do in-person meetings and relying on technology. So by recovering from this crisis purposefully, the SFMTA will be better positioned to address longstanding problems, serve our residents and workers, and help support the city's economic recovery. Thank you. That's the last slide.
Madam Chair, would you like to take general public comment, or would you like public comment on this matter, or go to board member questions and comments?
Somebody muted me, of course, sorry. I'd like to go to public comment first. Thank you.
All right, so members of the public who are watching this meeting by SFG TV who wish to address the board on this topic, please call 888-808-6929. The code is 9961164, and then dial 10. If the moderator can open the phone lines for a public comment.
Now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0.
All right, so we'll wait a moment for members of the public to dial in. Moderator, please let us know if there are members of the public online.
You have one question remaining.
All right, so speaker, please give us your name and we will start your time, your 2 minutes when you begin talking. Go ahead.
My name is Herbert Weiner, and my concern is, are we going to get our buses back? Are we going to get our Muni Metro back after this pandemic? Now, I don't like the idea of cutbacks in services. They've been cut back long enough. And what you're going to have is crowded buses, less people willing to take the bus service, decreased revenue, and basically it's a lose-lose proposition. Now, all these projects that you have contemplated should be put on hold and the money should be placed in public transportation. That's where it's really needed right now. And basically in a pandemic or any other crisis that you have, you're going to need public transportation. And right now it's one disaster preparing for another. I really think that you really should focus on public transportation, and these other projects are peripheral. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
You have one question remaining.
All right, please give us your name, speaker, and we'll start your time as soon as you begin talking.
Yes, hi, this is Barry Toronto. I appreciate the presentation by both Mr. Tumblin and his staff member. I also appreciate the mentioning of taxis and the importance of them, especially with ETC. I'm urging you to consider a longer-term process for the ETC by evaluating who is using the card, and how frequently, and the type of trips they're doing. I think expanding the program was a great idea. Though I'm concerned that there's not enough promotion done. It should be more promoting among the public and also among the cab drivers. As part of the presentation, you need to include the issue of what happens when the loan payments start coming due with the credit union. Right now, there's a lot of drivers are not working. They're taking their cabs out of service, especially the purchase medallion holders. And how are they going to be able to make these loan payments? So I think you should take this as an urgency as part of the program presented today. Also, there is a lot more business, and you're correct. Traffic has increased immensely. So that's something that has to be dealt with, maybe more enforcement. But concerning the use of taxis, I think it's important that you work with the major dispatch services, and that you actually communicate
30 seconds
with cab drivers that there actually is business out there, and that you would encourage them to come out there and work, and also to provide more cleaning supplies. We need more masks, and we need more disinfectant spray, so that we can keep continuing to keep the cabs disinfected and clean for our passengers. So I'd appreciate you take these suggestions to heart, and thank you for including taxis as part of this plan.
All right, next speaker, please.
You have 0 questions remaining.
If there's anyone left who would like to call in, please press 10 now.
Otherwise, we will close public comment.
Moderator, please let us know if there's anyone else who...
You have 2 questions remaining.
All right, next speaker, please give us your name. We'll start your 2 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jody Medeiros, and I'm the Executive Director of Walk San Francisco. And I wanted to thank the presenter today for the Transit Recovery Program, and especially thank the SFMTA for the Slow Streets program. It's so important that we are providing safe space for people walking and biking for public health during this pandemic. One thing I want to make sure is we are not losing sight of Vision Zero, as we are more reliant on our 2 feet for getting around. We have not seen a single traffic-related fatality in the last 10 weeks during the shelter in place. And last Thursday, Walk San Francisco, we've had close to 100 people sign a letter, have sent a letter to Director Tumblin and the SFMTA board asking for 3 core priorities that we really need to have the SFMTA focus on to keep us safe. And that is, we'd love to see more red light cameras. We definitely need to see more dynamic speed radar signs, so we are tracking speed and speeding in San Francisco. And also we outlined 3 very simple to implement policies to keep people safe in the crosswalk. These are all things that are focused on the 5 most dangerous behaviors that we see for people driving that impact people walking and biking. And so we'd love to see these things addressed by this board and ask the SFMTA to
30 seconds
forward and hear more about these very practical, low-cost ways that we can be keeping our eye on the Vision Zero prize and keep people safe while we're walking and biking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
You have 1 question remaining.
All right, speaker, as soon as you give us your name, we will start the 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. This is Robin Kropp calling in. Thank you very much for getting through a very difficult time for all of us. So appreciate your efforts in helping us all do that. I have a couple of comments today. I would like to see as many routes as possible restored because people need to get around. And without them, I think they're going to be stranded. So my recommendation is to get all routes going, but maybe with less frequency in the beginning if it's a budget matter. So we'll all understand that, but help us get around. Second comment I want to make is one about air circulation in closed vehicles. I'm wondering whether there's concern about that because the virus can be passed around in a closed area. And so I want to raise questions about whether there could be windows opened for cross ventilation or any other ideas that you have to keep fresh, clear, clean air in these closed vehicles. And I'm just going to ask that question for your transportation engineers. I mean, whatever you know to keep the public and drivers as safe as possible during this post-COVID time. Because we never know if people are still going to be getting this and passing the virus around. So let's keep us as safe as possible with the closed area situation. And then number 3, I heard that the Backs First program got canceled, and I understand this program supports worker health, and I think your workers need that support. I think it'll also cost workers in the city more if workers get injured and hurt. So, you know, for financial reasons and for human reasons, I'd like to see the restoration. Okay, so I'm recommending that you restore the Backs First program so that our workers can be best supported for their health in the city. So I thank you for your time going forward. I know you all have challenges. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional speakers?
You have 1 question remaining.
All right, so if there's anyone else on the line or who wishes to address the board, please make sure to call 888-808-6929, code 9961164, dial 10 in order to make a comment. Okay, next speaker, please. Thank you for your patience. We'll start the time when you start talking. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. My name is Ron Katau. I wanted to thank MTA and compliment the staff for all the work that they've been doing responding to this pandemic, especially the rollout of slow streets and the new bike lane plans for South Street. But I wanted to especially highlight the proposal in this presentation that we just saw for more transit-only lanes. It's great to hear that natural experiment that happened during shelter-in-place proves what we already expect to be true, that transit-only lanes and buses not being in congestion speeds them up by quite a lot. I have seen the evidence of that from my kitchen window for a while. I live in top of the Red Lane on Geary Street, and so and follow up on that recommendation and implement transit-only lanes across the city in the next 2 months Director Tumlin says we have before all hell breaks loose, particularly in places that have already been in the works or that have already been approved or are brought up for approval soon. So I'm thinking of places like 4th Street, 16th Street. There are also other locations that we talked about for a while, like Kearney Street, that are in dire need of transit-only lanes. And I hope that we can use the fact that there's not a lot of traffic right now, and that's much of a need to pause construction schedules to allow for commute traffic to get this done more quickly. And speaking of
30 seconds.
For some reason, the contractor doing work outside of my house is doing that, and they're working from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. here on the Geary utility relocation project, which seems a bit excessive enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional public commenters?
You have one question remaining.
Please proceed.
All right. Please give us your name.
Hi,
and we'll
this
start.
is Zach Deitch-Gross with.
Sorry, would you give us your name? Sorry,
Hi,
sir.
this is Zach Deitch-Gross.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, please, we can hear you.
Thanks. This is Zach Deitch-Gross with San Francisco Transit Riders. Really want to echo the hard work, thoughtful, and challenging experience this has been, I'm sure, for SFMTA, and thankful for all their time and effort to make sure we have essential trips in this challenging time. Also, thank you, Director Tumlin and Dan Howard, for this report, and I want to echo Rowan's support for transit-only lanes. We know these transit-only lanes remove competition with cars, reducing collisions, and getting buses out of traffic. With better service and more buses, we can make up for the fewer vehicles and fewer operators we will see in this crisis, and make sure we can continue to provide essential trips. So we look forward to working with SFMTA to advocate for more transit-only lanes to make sure transit is safe and accessible for everyone as we recover from this crisis.
Thank you very much. Any final questioners, moderator?
You have 0 questions remaining.
Wonderful, thank you. We will close public comment then. And then I will move on to directors once I hear the moderator say it's closed, I guess.
The line is closed.
Wonderful. And we'll move on to Director Heminger. I have some comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, I do. And first of all, I'd like to thank Jeff and Dan for a really excellent presentation. I think they've made a good first pass at the subject. At the same time, we're just seeing it for the first time today. And there is a lot of meat on those bones. And I'm sure each of us probably has a few more bones we'd like to throw on the pile as well. And that's why, Madam Chair, I would like to request that you schedule a board workshop on this subject. I think not only do we need to dig deeper in the areas that Jeff and Dan have outlined, but I think there are probably some instances where we need to look a little bit wider as well into other areas. Let me mention just 3 of them that come to my mind. You know, Jeff mentioned earlier that it only takes a little bit of movement from transit to autos to make things really bad. It works in reverse though too, and that is if you can just get 5 or 10% of the traffic off the road at a given time, you can dramatically increase mobility and reduce congestion. Where I used to work at MTC, we called it the Columbus Day effect because that's a holiday hardly anyone gets. But on that holiday, traffic is a whole lot better every year consistently. So that's just one example where, and maybe this is a partnership that we could pursue with the Board of Supervisors, and we seem to be in need of a little partnership with the Board of Supervisors lately. Is there a policy approach? Is there an ordinance or a city policy that we could put in place that would encourage more employers to maintain some level of teleworking? which is being used extensively right now. And I don't expect that we can keep it at the levels that we have now forever, but we don't need to. We need a modest and sustained increase to potentially have a significant beneficial effect on traffic. A second idea related to that is the question of whether or not we should be accelerating the project to put a cordon price in downtown San Francisco. If in fact we're going to go through a period of depressed transit ridership and increased auto use, then we really need all the tools at our disposal that we can have. And that's a very powerful tool that right now is not at our disposal, and we are going to need to get permission for it to happen. And should we be moving faster on that if that's one of the tools that we need to deal with this recovery? And thirdly, I'll mention a subject that I think Jeff's presentation did touch on, but perhaps not as much as I would like to see, and that is, how can we mainstream the quick build approach? Since I've been on this board, I've seen us use it from place to place, but I don't think we're yet into the regimen of using it systematically. And just to draw an analogy to the public health community, which right now has the ball and is running down the field as fast as they can in developing a vaccine. They are going through process changes that usually took years in months or weeks. And you can't do that with everything, admittedly. But I do believe we have an opportunity to deliver a lot of these improvements, especially a lot of the ideas that Jeff and Dan laid out here. I think they're not big capital projects. They can be done fairly quickly, and I think we ought to try to get the rule book to be the same size as the project, instead of having a phone book dealing with a bike lane. I think it's important that we have that workshop, Madam Chair, not only for ourselves, but obviously it could serve as a forum for our stakeholders. We heard some very thoughtful ideas today already from Walk SF, as well as the public. And ideally, we would do this in an in-person meeting. Maybe that's not going to be in the cards in the near future. But if it is...
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Director. Somebody needs to mute themselves. Someone is actually on the call and they don't realize that they're not muted. Thank you. Go ahead, Director Heminger. Sorry about that.
No trouble, and I was almost through. So I was just concluding with the question of if we can have such a workshop, do we need to do it virtually as we've been meeting for the last several weeks? Or are we going to be sprung loose pretty soon by the mayor, and maybe we could do it in person? Obviously, it would be easier to do it in person because a workshop by its nature can be more free-flowing than our formal public meetings, and just the nature of the technology requires us to be a little bit more formal when we do the meetings virtually. But I'll leave that to the staff and in your good hands, but I would hope that you'll consider scheduling such a workshop so that we could deal with a subject that's probably one of the most important ones that this or any board has dealt with in the 20 years of the MTA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Heminger. Director Brinkman, please.
Thank you, Chair Borden, and thank you, Director Heminger. Just fantastic ideas all around, and I want to just second all of them. If there is a way to get the congestion or decongestion charging moving more quickly, that you're right, that's going to be key. It's going to be key in our ability to control traffic congestion and keep our transit moving. I think that you're right, the Quick Build project has been really good, but it was developed for a pre-COVID time when quick was kind of relative to what we were able to do then, but now we need sort of super quick. It's like we need a moonshot for transportation in San Francisco. So two specific requests, and one is that, and it's probably going to be a big lift for staff to get everything ready for us to give them sort of the legislative scope of what they're going to need to move quickly. So that's going to be challenging, because I think that knowing what we need legislatively now is going to be a lot of work for them to get together. I agree that we need a really good free-flowing sort of open-jawed meeting in which to discuss this. I'm hoping we can do that at the June 2nd meeting, and if we all commit to spending the time that we need to spend, my hesitation in calling it a workshop is that I know how much time and energy staff puts into our normal workshops that we do, and I'm just worried about them being able to get that together, particularly for the June 2nd meeting, and then with enough time to follow through on those things. So I'm wondering if we can do this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, other directors and Director Heminger and Chair Borden, if we can have at the June 2nd an agenda item that just is very open-jawed. And again, we would all commit to spending the time we need to do it. I wish we could do it in person, maybe because there will only be 4 of us at that meeting. It will be easier to do some social distancing so that we can be in some scenario where we're face-to-face, and I totally leave that up to staff and the city guidelines to decide if that's feasible or not. But you're right, we do get better, we get better conversations and we get better interaction when we are able to be in person. So those are my 2 things. One is that what else do we need to build on our existing quick build legislation, and are we going to be able to legislate that and get it together in time for hopefully a June 2nd, which can be a regularly scheduled meeting that we kind of shape shift to give us that workshop feeling. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Brinkman. Director Eakin.
Thank you so much. So thanks, Dan and Jeff, for the presentation, and also just for the hard work that went into creating it. I want to start by just echoing the comments from my colleagues about setting aside some real time and space to explore all of the implications of COVID for the transportation system. So I would absolutely make the time, and I don't really think there could be time better spent in terms of facing some of these challenges and looking at some of the opportunities. I heard you ask, Dan, in your presentation for guidance from the board on how bold we should be on transit lanes and also on bike infrastructure. And I want to reflect that the way I think you laid out the issues, I start to feel convinced that bus lanes are not just a matter of running an efficient transit system. There's also a bit of a public health imperative to be able to run more buses along a given corridor in a certain amount of time. To be able to allow for distancing, as some of our public commenters have asked on those transit lines. And they also seem to have a bit of a financial imperative. If we can save money for our agency at this critical time by avoiding our operators and our vehicles sitting in traffic. So I want to encourage you to be very bold and take those public health and financial imperatives in mind as you progress. As regards biking and walking in slow streets, I'm delighted to see the progress, and I also am very encouraged to hear you say that a bike network, a complete network, is in the mix. Because, just personally, I took a trip with my family by bike this weekend, and we were so delighted when we saw that most of that trip was going to be along Lake Street, because it's just so relaxing when you finally get to a place where you don't have to worry about cars for a minute, especially when you're riding with kids. And if we're serious about encouraging people to bike, I think we need to give people that continuous low stress network all over the city, not just on a couple streets. And I think Cheryl was talking about how wonderful it is to see children and see people coming out and exploring the public realm, exploring their streets. And I think that's a little bit of an indicator. If a 4-year-old kid is comfortable riding on a bike on a street, that's a safe street. And I just really think we need to look at how, as Director Tumlin said, how our infrastructure does or does not reflect our values. A colleague recently told me, why do people drive to work? They drive because when you get in a car and drive to work, you don't worry that the road is going to end before you get to your office. Like, you're guaranteed that the road is going to get you all the way there. But when people bike, you can be on a comfortable bike facility and then all of a sudden it just ends. And there's not been a commitment made to make it a safe trip and a comfortable trip. So you asked how bold to be. I want to at least answer that question directly, and I want to encourage you to be very bold. If we think about our infrastructure having to reflect our values, we also heard from Director Tumlin that the safety and health of the staff and the public is our top priority. And I just wanted to share a thought I heard from a colleague recently at the Green Lining Institute. That's a social equity organization. He said he doesn't believe that the COVID pandemic presents us with opportunities, but that it presents us with a responsibility. And I really, really love that reframing. And I think our current street system does not adequately reflect our values. And I believe it's our responsibility in the recovery to make it so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Eakin. And I said, Director Heminger, you had another comment?
Yeah, I just briefly wanted to respond to Director Brickman. I share her concern about overloading the staff. At the same time, I mean, workshops, in my experience, not only the one we had for our budget a few months ago, but others over my career, they really go better if you do have quite a bit of preparation going into them. And I know Jeff is in the queue to speak soon, so he may have some thoughts about this. And they may have done quite a bit of work already. But I do think for the workshop to have value, we at least need a concentrated period of time, whether it's during a regular meeting or during a special meeting. And we may need more than one bite at the apple to really get the work done. Because again, as I said, I think there is a lot to chew on in what we've just been presented today. And then there are some other ideas that I think merit some attention. And those need to be sort of briefed out and prepped, I think, for us to have a useful discussion.
Great. So I mean, thank you all for everything you've said. I agree with much of everything that's been said here. The only thing I will take umbrage with Director Heminger is encouraging people to telecommute. That has a larger impact on our city in terms of the economic vitality of small businesses and restaurants and others that need the traffic for us to recover as a city. And so I think that and the sales tax revenue, which actually helps us. So while it's what's actually been harder is a lot of businesses have decided to have their people telecommute for the rest of the year. Twitter and other businesses, Google have made similar announcements, and that is going to be actually devastating on our revenues in the long term, short and long term, because of the fact that we're not going to have the sales tax purchases locally. So we need to balance how we get people back to work using alternative modes of transportation and making it more attractive and easier for them to access them, as opposed to encouraging people to telecommute. I did have a question before I move to Director Tumlin to kind of talk more generally about how we can do something like a workshop or spend some time drilling down on these key areas and allow more community input. I did have a question around the masks and the cleaning, and I do think that one of the things we do need to do, I think it would be helpful if we had a more extensive demo and showing of the public of how we're doing that. I think there's a lack of knowledge to that practices that we're undertaking. And I know that we've changed out cleaning between shifts, and we have like a fogger machine that we work with. And I know we have masks, but maybe you could just put a fine point on some of the key things we're doing in that area. I also saw that the Transit Riders Union was raising money to give masks to muni drivers, and I just would love to understand what we're doing in terms of providing masks per shifts and just kind of those sort of basic issues to help reassure the public and also better educate us. So if you can address that, and then all the topics that our directors have brought up and how we can do a kind of workshop or drill down on the topics that we've more generally talked about, that'd be great.
Okay. All right, let me just dive in. There were a lot of points, but I was able to take good notes. I don't know why my video went off. There we are, I'm back. So why don't I take this in reverse order? So in terms of masks and cleaning, it appears that SFMTA is, I don't know that we are the national leader, but we're certainly among the national leaders on cleaning our vehicles and keeping our operators safe, and that has certainly borne itself out in our virus transmission rates. In fact, we're one of a very small number of operators where there has been not a single incidence of worker-to-worker transmission of the virus. This is phenomenal. And so a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are providing personal protective equipment to all of our operators. In fact, all of our frontline workers, including our car cleaners, our mechanics have access. We're doing a lot of work around protecting the operator cabin. These are, of course, the reasons why we eliminated the cable car and F-line service at the very beginning of this crisis to make sure that we're protecting our workforce. And over the last couple of weeks, we changed all of our operational schedules, both to provide every operator with a consistent shift, but also to make sure that each operator can return to the yard at the end of every shift so that the bus can be cleaned before another operator takes the bus out for service. All of these things have enabled us to really crush the curve. One of the very few exceptions that we've made to our hiring freeze is hiring new car cleaners. Just this last week, I went out and visited with them. They're very grateful to have work at a time of rising unemployment, and they're also necessary in order to supplement our disaster service worker volunteers who have stepped in to dramatically help with the cleaning. We're grateful to those folks, but that is not sustainable in the long run, so we need to make sure that we're adequately staffed. So we could probably do a better job telling that story, but as you can imagine, all of our communications and engagement team are fully tapped out. So there are hundreds of stories that we need to tell, and a lot of our focus has been on our internal audience, particularly helping to make sure our staff understand what they need to be doing in order to keep themselves, their colleagues, and the public safe. So we've had to limit actually some of our external engagement just as a result of resources. On transportation demand management, we do have a small team working on this. We want to make sure that we're supporting demand management in a way that is pro-business. So not imposing new regulatory requirements on business, but basically providing them with some helpful resources. Because what we're finding is that businesses have a lot of built-in incentive to do transportation demand management, largely rooted in elevator capacity. Which is quite interesting. So the office building owners are already doing work to spread out the peak, which is helpful for us. We're providing some additional support, including like the taxi ride home programs and other things that partner agencies are supporting us with. So we'll provide you more information on that. Understanding that this tension between wanting to reduce travel in order to maximize safety and capacity on our limited transit system, but at the same time maximize the economy. So one way of achieving both is by spreading out the peak. On the idea of a workshop, we are interested in this, but we need to do it very differently than we've done workshops in the past. So the budget workshop that we put together for you, that was a massive behind the scenes staff effort. All of that was very carefully staged. We set up the questions in a very precise order. We had all the data ready for you and the storytelling put together. We don't have the capacity to do that. So if we're going to do a workshop, you get to do it in the same way that our Department Operations Center is now doing its business. So we've expanded our work production output by a full order of magnitude. And in order to do that, it means things are messy and in real time, and it's a little chaotic. But I think if you and the public can handle real life, real time, messy planning, we would love your engagement. This is definitely a new way of doing business, but everything requires a new way of doing business. So this will be an experiment and it will not be pretty. So that said, I think there's a lot that we can do, bringing together our core staff, revealing all of the data that we have, which is fantastic, putting up some big maps, and hunkering down and figuring out together what are our priorities. Because I think it would actually be a great investment in time for all of you to understand how things are working at that level. On pricing, yes, this is a hugely important topic, and the last SFCTA decongestion pricing study back from 2007 got slammed in the 2008 recession. This recession, however, is different from the last one in some fundamental ways. And I think that there is a recognition, particularly given the SFCTA's emphasis on using pricing in order to advance equity and small business success, rather than simply raise revenue. I think there's a way that we can help frame the conversation in a different way and show the urgency of doing downtown decongestion pricing now in order to forestall a real crisis of congestion that will prevent further economic recovery. We know that SFCTA is moving forward with their study. We also know that because implementation of that work requires state legislative approval, that it's not a short-term solution. One thing that we might want to have you all consider is things that would be short-term solutions, like changing the Bay Area Toll Authority's approach for pricing on the Bay Bridge. So as you know, MTC, or in its form as the Bay Area Toll Authority, reduced the toll rates on the Bay Bridge, as a result of a lack of traffic. Traffic's going to come rip-roaring back, and our current policy as a region is to balance the demand for mobility by using people's time rather than using their money. And this would be a good time to experiment with actual decongestion pricing on the Bay Bridge, particularly given the health impacts of storing the queue for the Bay Bridge in West Oakland. That queue dumps a lot of particulate emissions on the children growing up in West Oakland. And the result of that is kids growing up in West Oakland have a life expectancy that's 15 years less than kids growing up in other neighborhoods. So perhaps it is time to have a real conversation about how to manage the transportation system regionally for the public good. I know that pricing is unpopular, as you all know from the fair conversations that we've had at this board, but it is also how we balance supply and demand for all other public goods, and that wasting people's time as opposed to asking them to spend their money means that we don't have the resources to invest in improved services for the people who need it the most. So I'll leave that with you if you want to take a role in that. Another key issue that could help us to move forward, moving on to the topic of quick build. The emergency directive has eliminated a lot of pointless bureaucracy. Most of the rules set up around governance are set up to slow progress. Most of the rules that we have to follow are about maintaining the status quo so that, corrupt or crazy department heads can't move forward with stupid ideas. And there are good reasons for all of those rules, and yet they dramatically slow down our ability to do business. Under the emergency directive, you've seen we've been able to move very quickly, but we will soon run into problems as we try to make these temporary pilot emergency measures into permanent change. So for example, something that's been talked about for years is creating a statutory exemption in CEQA for transportation projects in the existing public right-of-way that do not increase per capita vehicle miles traveled. So why should we continue to have to spend a lot of time doing a CEQA analysis on a bike lane striping project in the public right-of-way that doesn't represent a dire threat to the California environment? These are bureaucratic steps that slow us down and limit our ability to do good work. I think we've been able to demonstrate these last 2 months that government is really capable of getting stuff done if it is clear about its values, if it understands and can measure the public good, and if pointless bureaucratic rules are temporarily set aside. Imagine what we could do if those rules actually supported doing good work in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, support public equity, support small business economy, and support quality of life for all San Franciscans. So all that said, I think that we're learning a lot in this time period about how to institutionalize quick build, even within the constraints of the bureaucratic rules that we have to follow. And we're eager to demonstrate that for Muni projects, as we have with Slow Streets and with some of our bikeway projects. And with that, I think I would just close by saying to Director Eakin that I really love this idea of not just taking advantage of this crisis, but acknowledging that we have a deep responsibility to ensure that we are directing our very, very limited financial and staff resources to protecting the public health in this crisis and establishing the basis of a strong and resilient and equitable economy coming out of this crisis. Thank
you. So with that, unless there's any final questions, oh, Director Brinkman.
Thank you. Just one final comment, not a question, just a comment. Yes, I think that we do want to be bold. It sounds like we do want some type of messy, down and dirty workshop scenario that doesn't create extra work for staff, but actually gives staff and gives you the opportunity to get our feedback so that you know we're fully in support of the decisions that will be made and the direction that will be taken. And I'll agree with you, Director Eakin. I just love that idea that COVID doesn't create opportunities; it creates a responsibility for us to respond to this whole situation and keep things going. So that's it. And yes, let's do it. If we can figure out a way to do a down and dirty workshop type scenario, let's do it.
Dr. Heminger.
Yeah, Director Brinkman just stole the words out of my mouth. What I read our director to say is he was challenging us to down and dirty, so I think we should accept the challenge. I would also remind him that the variable toll we had on the Bay Bridge before COVID was something that I put in place. So maybe it just needs to be higher.
So Director Tumlin, I guess we'll talk all offline about what that means, this down and dirty process. We obviously have a June 2nd meeting. Do you anticipate taking that meeting to do part of this process? How do you see that, just out of curiosity, and maybe working through the secretary as well to think that through a little bit?
Yeah, I think we'll all want to make sure that we're collaborating with Secretary Boomer on making sure that my ambition is grounded in reality. One thing that we may want to do is, rather than trying to do one workshop, to look at a sort of rolling workshop pattern through the summer. Things need to move far more quickly than they typically do at this agency. And so having a workshop component of each meeting might allow us to move forward quickly and also reduce the burden on staff for preparing them. And that way we could present to you in real time what we're working on and get guidance as we go along.
So maybe we can pick the area that is most eminent in terms of like what we want to address, whether it's the quick build or things that we want to get done in the very near term as the first topic. Secretary Boomer, I know that you want to weigh in.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So while you've been talking, I have received an email. Staff is being coordinated to bring a transit recovery plan to the board on June 2nd. Originally, we had not thought that meeting would be necessary given the lack of essential to government items that were scheduled for that meeting. We would still have those items all on consent, but we could, like you did today with this meeting, focus the rest of your time and most of your time in a workshop type of fashion, an informational item. I think it may be too early for final final decisions, give staff a little bit of time to get the information from you, bat things around, and then come back at subsequent meetings for key decisions as staff is ready. So I think the June 2nd meeting could easily accommodate I love the messy, down and dirty idea, and just really focusing staff toward that at this point.
Great. So if we can really target those items that we'd like done more quickly, right? The things that we want to work on more, like that are much more eminent, that would be ideal, I think, for June 2nd. And then we can phase out, if we're going to do a series of workshops, the stuff that's the bigger picture, how we want to be in the future versus the things that we want to actually be able to announce or do in the near term.
Yes, Madam Chair, we are very cognizant of Director Tumlin's a sense of urgency and need to get decisions, not only decisions in place in the next 2 months, but also be able to put the decisions in the ground. Because that's going to take a bit of time. And so the earlier we can start that dialogue with the board, I think the better.
Absolutely. And I would just say whatever we can prioritize before we are reopened, so to speak. I think we have a real opportunity now to do things and a real desire. And if we don't make any changes and people just go back from completely sheltered to how it was before, we'll have lost this opportunity to capture people's idea and spirit of creativity and desire to see something different, because we will revert back to old patterns. So whatever, we can do to and if there's other agencies or people we need to engage in the process sooner, even have at that workshop to think about, have at the conversation on the 2nd to think about, let's do that as well. And maybe even tap into the mayor's recovery task force and other things that are being worked on there that intersect, because I do think that there is, because we were just talking about the toll, changing the way the toll authority works, or even congestion pricing locally. I think there is a intersection of kind of how we can best capture some of the economic vitality issues that intersect with people's desires for more open space and street space. So
Great,
with that,
Madam Chair, that concludes all the business before you today.
Wonderful. So with that, we adjourn, and everyone have a safe couple weeks and a great Memorial Day, and we'll see you back on June 2nd.
Thank you, Director Torres.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Director Torres.
Bye, Director Torres. Thank you.
Bye, Director Torres.